Hey guys, welcome back to my channel where I talk about the NWSL, women's soccer, just soccer, only soccer. I'm getting to this story a little late today because when it came out earlier this morning, I was just so angry and disgusted reading it. I wouldn't be able to get through the script or video without calling ex-Washington Spirit head coach Richie Burke a raging, egotistical, sociopathic douchebag. Sorry. Actually, no, I'm not. Reading this article was beyond infuriating. What Richie Burke put this player through is awful and horrendous, and I hope Richie Burke never steps foot onto a soccer pitch, and I hope this guy never gets to work as a soccer coach ever again. I'll leave a link in the description below to the article. I don't recommend that you read it. If you already have high blood pressure. So this article is about Jenna Hellstrom, a Canadian soccer player who signed with the Washington Spirit in 2020. Jenna Hellstrom was the anonymous source that came forward in the first Washington Post article that highlighted Richie Burke's verbal and emotional abuse towards the Washington Spirit players. Jenna Hellstrom decided to tell her story in this new article. Hellstrom says while under Burke, she would go home crying every day and was even crying at practice. It made her hate soccer and even made her think about retiring. Around this time, Hellstrom was only 25. Jenna Hellstrom made her debut at the 2020 Challenge Cup. At a practice before the game, Hellstrom and her teammates were running a corner drill, and a player Hellstrom was marking was able to get around her or get away from her and was able to score. Burke went on to scream at Hellstrom, saying, "If that happens in a game, you're never going to play for me." Again, this was at practice, and it was a drill. Players on the Spirit have said Burke would often pick on certain players, and other players from previous teams Burke had coached had said he would especially pick on players he didn't like or didn't bring onto the team. I'm guessing this was the case with Jenna Hellstrom. It wasn't tough love. It wasn't constructive criticism. He did not like her, plain and simple. He did not like her and decided to treat her terribly because he could, and no one would stop him. The article then goes on to talk about Hellstrom's debut game. The Washington Spirit were leading the Chicago Red Stars 2-1, and Hellstrom was prepping and about to come on. Burke said to her before she was about to sub in, "If you make an attacking run, and they score, that's on you. You're going to lose the game for us." Already blaming her that it's her fault if they lose the game if she tries to attack or make a run. After Burke said that to her, Hellstrom said, "I was feeling anxiety. I never felt anxiety ever in my life. I just felt so much pressure in my chest." And you want to know something messed up? This was the player mentioned in the Washington Post article who was having a panic attack during the game. Hellstrom was the player Burke kept screaming at while she was having a panic attack. One of Hellstrom's former teammates said to TSN, she, Hellstrom, seemed to be physically struggling, like she couldn't catch her breath or something. Kaya McCullough said he wasn't giving her any room to breathe, basically. And you can see her sort of spiraling on the field. I think everybody who knew Richie knew that he wasn't going to let up. It was like watching a car crash. You knew what was going to happen, but there wasn't really anything you can do about it. After the game, Hellstrom told one of her teammates she just wanted to go home, and she didn't want to start in any more games. Burke noticed Hellstrom and her teammate talking and jumped into the conversation, yelling and screaming once again at Hellstrom for taking up the other player's time. Burke said, and this is what really pissed me off, He said, "You're selfish. You took one of our players away from our first win. You're never going to make Canada again. You're not mentally tough. Burke continued to berate her for almost 30 minutes after the game. You know, funny that this guy is saying that Hellstrom would never make the Canadian national team again, but I guarantee Richie Burke would never make it as a coach for the U.S. women's national team, Germany's women's national team, England's women's national team, or the Dutch women's national team. No national team would hire Richie Burke because they wouldn't tolerate this behavior. Also, you're selfish, says the guy who shows a complete disregard to a rookie player's health by screaming at her and causing her to have a panic attack in the middle of a game. You're selfish, says the guy who's continuing to berate said player for 30 minutes after a game. It gets so much worse. Hellstrom returned to Canada for a bit, but before she was set to leave and go back to Washington for training, her grandmother had fallen ill and would have to be put on a ventilator. Hellstrom decided to stay in Canada, wanting to be there to say goodbye and to go to her grandmother's funeral. Hellstrom phoned Burke to tell him what was going on. All he said was that she would need to pay for a hotel for quarantine upon her return. After her grandmother passed away, Hellstrom returned to the Spirit, and when she was about to enter a game, Burke said to her, "Okay, you were just on a 6-week vacation, let's see what you got." Again, Hellstrom was away because her grandmother passed away. This guy basically said her grandmother in the hospital, dying, passing away, and her going to her grandmother's funeral was a vacation. There's so much I want to say about that, but I'm not going to say it. Anyway, Hellstrom decided to go to the NWSL Players Association to report Richie Burke, and she was told to approach Steve Baldwin, the owner of the Washington Spirit. Hellstrom decided not to do that because she figured it was just pointless. Steve Baldwin and Richie Burke were friends. Burke had even coached Baldwin's daughter at one point. He had also coached Larry Best, the club president's daughter. Hellstrom said, "I think the ownership had way too much power. If you're best friends with the ownership, okay, you can be head coach no matter what." Hellstrom went on to fill out an NWSL end of the year survey, and she detailed her experience and time with Burke. And guess what? No one contacted Hellstrom. The NWSL never followed it up. According to the article, when asked why the league never followed up on Hellstrom's complaints in the survey, an NWSL spokesperson issued this statement to TSN. The NWSL has initiated an investigation to review historical and ongoing complaints of discrimination, harassment, or abuse, and where necessary, reopen investigations into these complaints or initiate a new education process. That includes anonymous survey results from 2020. The NWSL is committed to making the systematic and cultural changes necessary to create a safe environment for our players and staff, and this investigation is an important step in that process. Yeah, great PR speak, great runaround, but you didn't answer the question at all. Why did the league never follow up on Hellstrom's complaints in the first place? Hellstrom would go on to leave the NWSL, choosing to return to one of her former teams in Sweden, KIF Örebro. Burke responded to a request to comment by TSN and said in a text message in regards to Jenna Hellstrom, "It was clear that Jenna Hellstrom didn't like me, and I couldn't stand her. And I couldn't stand her either. I couldn't wait to get her out of the club because she was a cancer in the dressing room. She constantly made snarky comments at training and was influencing other players negatively." Kaya McCullough counters in defense of Hellstrom, saying, "That's completely untrue. Jenna was a very positive influence around everybody. Burke then added, I tried to move her in several trades, but no one was interested in including her in exchange for other players. She arrived in preseason injured and had to undergo surgery through our club. She went home to Canada on 2 occasions, and both times she extended her visit beyond what we'd agreed before she left. She couldn't be trusted, and we had no intention of bringing her back in 2021. Hellstrom said in response to that, this response doesn't surprise me at all. He constantly bullied me throughout my entire year, and this is just another form of his egotistical bullying. Also want to add that Hellstrom didn't arrive to the Spirit injured. She had a scope of her knee and was cleared to train with the Washington Spirit. She did aggravate the injury, but was able to get a platelet-rich plasma injection, which allowed her to play the season with no issue. The team offered her surgery after the fall series, and she accepted. Burke then says in another text to TSN, saying, the NWSL independent investigators provided 60 pages of information in the Washington Spirit and could not substantiate any claims of verbal abuse made by players in 2020. Video evidence and text messages were included along with players' interviews that did not corroborate the story told to media. Burke then adds, I've been hounded out of a job, lost my reputation and income, and falsely accused by players with an axe to grind. I just want to say, just because the independent investigators couldn't substantiate any claims of verbal abuse doesn't mean that it didn't happen. It doesn't automatically absolve you of anything. There were allegations of verbal and emotional abuse by Richie Burke preceding his hiring to the NWSL. Also, according to an article that covered the investigation, it said, based on the investigation's findings and the NWSL's determination that the Washington Spirit head coach cannot work with any NWSL players, the Washington Spirit's head coach has been terminated for cause. In another article, Molly Hensley Clancy writes, the investigators from the outside firm had found multiple violations of the league's harassment policy and had found that the Spirit management and leaders created a toxic work environment. Steve Baldwin and Spirit executives knew about Richie Burke's treatment of players and did not report Burke. In fact, Baldwin, Burke, and President of Sporting Operations Larry Best made it so players and employees couldn't speak up. I did a video a while ago talking about the investigation, and I'll leave that in the description below as well. Anyway, I am so tired of talking about Richie Burke. Like, this guy has no accountability at all. Everything that happened to him, losing his job, losing his reputation, and income is all his fault. But instead of taking accountability for his actions for what he did, he's blaming players like Jenna Hellstrom and Kaya McCullough. Like, honestly, do you think Jenna Hellstrom wanted to have a panic attack on the field during her debut? No, that was all Burke. Anyway, to close out this article, Jenna Hellstrom is doing well since leaving the Spirit. She and Kaya McCullough are still close, but Hellstrom laments that none of her former teammates have reached out to her. Hellstrom, however, said this past year was her best pro season with KIF Orebro, finishing as the team's top scorer with four goals and 7 points. Hellstrom also decided to extend her contract for another year with the Swedish club. Canadian head coach Bev Priestman said of Hellstrom, "She is one of the most committed Canadians I've spoken to. Any player like that is high on my list." Hellstrom said that while she is welcoming an invite back to the Canadian national team, her focus now is on her club and rediscovering her love for the game. That being said, I wish nothing but love and healing for Jenna Hellstrom and Kaya McCullough as well moving forward. I'm glad Jenna Hellstrom is still playing soccer, and I do hope one day she does get called up to the Canadian women's national team. From what Priestman says, it seems likely. Thank you, Jenna Hellstrom, for coming forward with your story. It's not an easy thing to do, but thank you. Hopefully, Hellstrom's story will encourage others who suffered abuse to come forward and share their stories as well. Anyway, that is all I have for you guys today or tonight, and I'll see you all in the next one. Later.